Chapter 36. Bezalel, therefore, will set to work with Oholiab and with all the experts whom the Lord has endowed with skill and understanding in knowing how to execute all the work for the service of the sanctuary, just as the Lord has commanded. Moses then called Bezalel and Oholiab and all the other experts whom the Lord had endowed with skill, men whose hearts moved them to come and take part in the work. They received from Moses all the contributions which the Israelites had brought for establishing the service of the sanctuary. Still, morning after morning, the people continued to bring their voluntary offerings to Moses. Thereupon, the experts who were executing the various kinds of work for the sanctuary all left the work they were doing, and told Moses, "The people are bringing much more than is needed to carry out the work which the Lord has commanded us to do." Moses therefore ordered a proclamation to be made throughout the camp. "Let neither man nor woman make any more contributions for the sanctuary." So the people stopped bringing their offerings. There was already enough at hand, in fact, more than enough, to complete the work to be done. The various experts who were executing the work made the dwelling with its 10 sheets of woven fine linen twined, having cherubim embroidered on them with violet, purple, and scarlet yarn. The length of each sheet was 28 cubits, and the width 4 cubits. All the sheets were of the same size. 5 of the sheets were sewed together, edge to edge, and the same for the other 5. Loops of violet yarn were made along the edge of the end sheet in the first set, and the same along the edge of the end sheet in the second set. 50 loops were thus put on one inner sheet, and 50 loops on the inner sheet in the other set, with the loops directly opposite each other. Then 50 clasps of gold were made, with which the sheets were joined so that the dwelling formed one whole. Sheets of goat hair were also woven as a tent over the dwelling. 11 such sheets were made. The length of each sheet was 30 cubits, and the width 4 cubits. All 11 sheets were of the same size. 5 of these sheets were sewed edge to edge into one set, and the other 6 sheets into another set. 50 loops were made along the edge of the end sheet in one set, and 50 loops along the edge of the corresponding sheet in the other set. 50 bronze clasps were made, with which the tent was joined so that it formed one whole. A covering for the tent was made of ram skins dyed red, and above that a covering of Tahash skins. Boards of acacia wood were made as walls for the dwelling. The length of each board was 10 cubits, and the width 1.5 cubits. Each board had 2 arms, fastening them in line. In this way, all the boards of the dwelling were made. They were set up as follows: 20 boards on the south side, with 40 silver pedestals under the 20 boards, so that there were 2 pedestals under each board at its 2 arms. 20 boards on the other side of the dwelling, the north side, with their 40 silver pedestals, 2 under each board, 6 boards at the rear of the dwelling to the west, and 2 boards at the corners in the rear of the dwelling. These were double at the bottom, and likewise double at the top, to the first ring. That is how both boards in the corners were made. Thus there were in the rear 8 boards, with their 16 silver pedestals, 2 pedestals under each board. Bars of acacia wood were also made, 5 for the boards on one side of the dwelling, 5 for those on the other side, and 5 for those at the rear to the west. The center bar at the middle of the boards was made to reach across from end to end. The boards were plated with gold, and gold rings were made on them as holders for the bars, which were also plated with gold. The veil was woven of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn, and of fine linen twined, with cherubim embroidered on it. 4 gold-plated columns of acacia wood with gold hooks were made for it, and 4 silver pedestals were cast for them. The curtain of the entrance of the tent was made of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn, and of fine linen twined, woven in a variegated manner. Its 5 columns, with their hooks as well as their capitals and bands, were plated with gold. Their 5 pedestals were of bronze. Chapter 37. Bezalel made the ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. The inside and outside were plated with gold, and a molding of gold was put around it. 4 gold rings were cast and put on its 4 supports. 2 rings for one side and 2 for the opposite side. Poles of acacia wood were made and plated with gold. These were put through rings on the sides of the ark for carrying it. The propitiatory was made of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide. 2 cherubim of beaten gold were made for the 2 ends of the propitiatory. 1 cherub fastened at one end and the other at the other end, springing directly from the propitiatory at its 2 ends. The cherubim had their wings spread out above, covering the propitiatory with them. They were turned toward each other, but with their faces looking toward the propitiatory. The table was made of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. It was plated with pure gold, and a molding of gold was put around it. A frame a handbreadth high was also put around it, with a molding of gold around the frame. 4 rings of gold were cast for it and fastened, 1 at each of the 4 corners. The rings were alongside the frame as holders for the poles to carry the table. These poles were made of acacia wood and plated with gold. The vessels that were set on the table, its plates and cups, as well as its pitchers and bowls for pouring libations, were of pure gold. The lampstand was made of pure beaten gold, its shaft and branches, as well as its cups and knobs and petals springing directly from it. 6 branches extended from its sides, 3 branches on one side and 3 on the other. On one branch there were 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with its knob and petals. On the opposite branch there were 3 cups shaped like almond blossoms, each with its knob and petals, and so for the 6 branches that extended from the lampstand. On the shaft there were 4 cups shaped like almond blossoms, with their knobs and petals, including a knob below each of the 3 pairs of branches that extended from the lampstand. The knobs and branches sprang so directly from it that the whole formed but a single piece of pure beaten gold. Its 7 lamps, as well as its trimming shears and trays, were made of pure gold. A talent of pure gold was used for the lampstand and its various appurtenances. The altar of incense was made of acacia wood, on a square, a cubit long, a cubit wide, and 2 cubits high, having horns that sprang directly from it. Its grate on top, its walls on all 4 sides, and its horns were plated with pure gold, and a molding of gold was put around it. Underneath the molding, gold rings were placed, 2 on one side and 2 on the opposite side, as holders for the poles to carry it. The poles, too, were made of acacia wood and plated with gold. The sacred anointing oil and the fragrant incense were prepared in their pure form by a perfumer. Chapter 38. The altar of Holocausts was made of acacia wood, on a square 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. Its height was 3 cubits. At the 4 corners, horns were made that sprang directly from the altar. The whole was plated with bronze. All the utensils of the altar, the pots, shovels, basins, forks, and firepans, were likewise made of bronze. A grating of bronze network was made for the altar and placed around it, on the ground half as high as the altar itself. 4 rings were cast for the 4 corners of the bronze grating, as holders for the poles, which were made of acacia wood and plated with bronze. The poles were put through the rings on the sides of the altar for carrying it. The altar was made in the form of a hollow box. The bronze layer, with its bronze base, was made from the mirrors of the women who served at the entrance of the meeting tent. The court was made as follows. On the south side of the court there were hangings, woven of fine linen twined, 100 cubits long, with 20 columns and 20 pedestals of bronze, the hooks and bands of the columns being of silver. On the north side there were similar hangings, 100 cubits long, with 20 columns and 20 pedestals of bronze, the hooks and bands of the columns being of silver. On the west side there were hangings 50 cubits long, with 10 columns and 10 pedestals, the hooks and bands of the columns being of silver. On the east side the court was 50 cubits long. Toward one side there were hangings to the extent of 15 cubits, with 3 columns and 3 pedestals. Toward the other side, beyond the entrance of the court, There were likewise hangings to the extent of 15 cubits, with 3 columns and 3 pedestals. The hangings on all sides of the court were woven of fine linen twined. The pedestals of the columns were of bronze, while the hooks and the bands of the columns were of silver. The capitals were silver-plated, and all the columns of the court were banded with silver. At the entrance of the court there was a variegated curtain woven of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn and of fine linen twined, 20 cubits long and 5 cubits wide, in keeping with the hangings of the court. There were 4 columns and 4 pedestals of bronze for it, while their hooks were of silver. All the tent pegs for the dwelling and for the court around it were of bronze. The following is an account of the various amounts used on the dwelling of the commandments, drawn up at the command of Moses by the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, son of Aaron the priest. However, it was Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, who made all that the Lord commanded Moses. And he was assisted by Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, who was an engraver, an embroiderer, and a weaver of variegated cloth of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn, and of fine linen. All the gold used in the entire construction of the sanctuary, having previously been given as an offering, amounted to 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the standard of the sanctuary shekel. The amount of silver received from the community was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels, according to the standard of the sanctuary shekel. 1 beka apiece, that is, a half shekel apiece, according to the standard of the sanctuary shekel, was received from every man of 20 years or more who entered the registered group. The number of these was 603,550 men. 100 talents of silver were used for casting the pedestals of the sanctuary and the pedestals of the veil, 1 talent for each pedestal, or 100 talents for the 100 pedestals. The remaining 1,775 shekels were used for making the hooks on the columns, for plating the capitals, and for banding them with silver. The bronze, given as an offering, amounted to 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. With this were made the pedestals at the entrance of the meeting tent, the bronze altar with its bronze gratings and all the appurtenances of the altar, the pedestals around the court, the pedestals at the entrance of the court, and all the tent pegs for the dwelling and for the court around it. Chapter 39. With violet, purple, and scarlet yarn were woven the service cloths for use in the sanctuary, as well as the sacred vestments for Aaron, as the Lord commanded Moses. The ephod was woven of gold thread and of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn, and of fine linen twined. Gold was first hammered into gold leaf and then cut up into threads, which were woven with the violet, purple, and scarlet yarn into an embroidered pattern on the fine linen. Shoulder straps were made for it, and joined to its 2 upper ends. The embroidered belt on the ephod extended out from it, and like it was made of gold thread, of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn, and of fine linen twined, as the Lord commanded Moses. The onyx stones were prepared and mounted in gold filigree work. They were engraved like seal engravings with the names of the sons of Israel. These stones were set on the shoulder straps of the ephod as memorial stones of the sons of Israel, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. The breastpiece was embroidered like the ephod, with gold thread and violet, purple, and scarlet yarn on cloth of fine linen twined. It was square and folded double, a span high and a span wide in its folded form. 4 rows of precious stones were mounted on it. In the first row, a carnelian, a topaz, and an emerald. In the second row, a garnet, a sapphire, and a beryl. In the third row, a jacinth, an agate, and an amethyst. In the fourth row, a chrysolite, an onyx, and a jasper. They were mounted in gold filigree work. These stones were 12 to match the names of the sons of Israel, and each stone was engraved like a seal with the name of one of the 12 tribes. Chains of pure gold, twisted like cords, were made for the breastpiece, together with 2 gold filigree rosettes and 2 gold rings. The 2 rings were fastened to the 2 upper ends of the breastpiece. The 2 gold chains were then fastened to the 2 rings at the ends of the breastpiece. The other 2 ends of the 2 chains were fastened in front to the 2 filigree rosettes, which were attached to the shoulder straps of the ephod. 2 other gold rings were made and put on the 2 lower ends of the breastpiece, on the edge facing the ephod. 2 more gold rings were made and fastened to the bottom of the 2 shoulder straps next to where they joined the ephod in front, just above the embroidered belt. Violet ribbons bound the rings of the breastpiece to the rings of the ephod so that the breastpiece stayed right above the embroidered belt of the ephod and did not swing loose from it. All this was just as the Lord had commanded Moses. The robe of the ephod was woven entirely of violet yarn, with an opening in its center, like the opening of a shirt, with selvage around the opening to keep it from being torn. At the hem of the robe, pomegranates were made of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn and of fine linen twined. Bells of pure gold were also made and put between the pomegranates all around the hem of the robe. First a bell, then a pomegranate, and thus alternating all around the hem of the robe, which was to be worn in performing the ministry, all this just as the Lord had commanded Moses. For Aaron and his sons there were also woven tunics of fine linen, the mitre of fine linen, the ornate turbans of fine linen, drawers of fine linen twined, and sashes of variegated work made of fine linen twined, and of violet, purple, and scarlet yarn, as the Lord had commanded Moses. The plate of the sacred diadem was made of pure gold, and inscribed, as on a seal engraving, "Sacred to the Lord." It was tied over the mitre with a violet ribbon, as the Lord had commanded Moses. Thus the entire work of the dwelling of the meeting tent was completed. The Israelites did the work just as the Lord had commanded Moses. They then brought to Moses the dwelling, the tent with all its appurtenances, the clasps, the boards, the bars, the columns, the pedestals, the covering of ram's skins dyed red, the covering of Tahash skins, the curtain veil, the Ark of the Commandments with its poles, the propitiatory, the table with all its appurtenances, and the showbread, the pure gold lampstand with its lamps set up on it and with all its appurtenances, the oil for the light, the golden altar, the anointing oil, the fragrant incense, the curtain for the entrance of the tent, the altar of bronze with its bronze grating, its poles and all its appurtenances, the laver with its base, the hangings of the court with their columns and pedestals, the curtain for the entrance of the court with its ropes and tent pegs, all the equipment for the service of the dwelling of the meeting tent. The service cloths for use in the sanctuary, the sacred vestments for Aaron the priest, and the vestments to be worn by his sons in their ministry. The Israelites had carried out all the work just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So when Moses saw that all the work was done, just as the Lord had commanded, he blessed them. Chapter 40. Then the Lord said to Moses, "On the first day of the first month you shall erect the dwelling of the meeting tent. Put the Ark of the Commandments in it, and screen off the Ark with the veil. Bring in the table and set it. Then bring in the lampstand and set up the lamps on it. Put the golden altar of incense in front of the Ark of the Commandments, and hang the curtain at the entrance of the dwelling. Put the altar of Holocausts in front of the entrance of the dwelling of the meeting tent. Place the laver between the meeting tent and the altar, and put water in it. Set up the court round about, and put the curtain at the entrance of the court. Take the anointing oil, and anoint the dwelling and everything in it, consecrating it and all its furnishings, so that it will be sacred. Anoint the altar of Holocausts, and all its appurtenances, consecrating it, so that it will be most sacred. Likewise, anoint the laver with its base, and thus consecrate it. Then bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the meeting tent, and there wash them with water. Clothe Aaron with the sacred vestments, and anoint him, thus consecrating him as my priest.
Bring forward his sons also, and clothe them with the tunics, as you have anointed their father. Anoint them also as my priests. Thus, by being anointed, they shall receive a perpetual priesthood throughout all future generations.
Moses did exactly as the Lord had commanded him. On the first day of the first month of the second year, the dwelling was erected. It was Moses who erected the dwelling. He placed its pedestals, set up its boards, put in its bars, and set up its columns. He spread the tent over the dwelling and put the covering on top of the tent, as the Lord had commanded him. He took the commandments and put them in the ark. He placed poles alongside the ark and set the propitiatory upon it. He brought the ark into the dwelling and hung the curtain veil, thus screening off the ark of the commandments, as the Lord had commanded him. He put the table in the meeting tent on the north side of the dwelling, outside the veil, and arranged the bread on it before the Lord, as the Lord had commanded him. He placed the lampstand in the meeting tent, opposite the table on the south side of the dwelling, and he set up the lamps before the Lord, as the Lord had commanded him. He placed the golden altar in the meeting tent in front of the veil, and on it he burned fragrant incense, as the Lord had commanded him. He hung the curtain at the entrance of the dwelling. He put the altar of holocausts in front of the entrance of the dwelling of the meeting tent, and he offered holocausts and cereal offerings on it, as the Lord had commanded him. He placed the laver between the meeting tent and the altar, and put water in it for washing. Moses and Aaron and his sons used to wash their hands and feet there, for they washed themselves whenever they went into the meeting tent or approached the altar, as the Lord commanded Moses. Finally, he set up the court around the dwelling and the altar and hung the curtain at the entrance of the court. Thus Moses finished all the work. Then the cloud covered the meeting tent, and the glory of the Lord filled the dwelling. Moses could not enter the meeting tent, because the cloud settled down upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the dwelling. Whenever the cloud rose from the dwelling, the Israelites would set out on their journey. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not go forward. Only when it lifted did they go forward. In the daytime, the cloud of the Lord was seen over the dwelling, whereas at night, fire was seen in the cloud by the whole house of Israel, in all the stages of their journey.